Why are there so many lawsuits in the cannabis industry? What can you do to protect yourself from a pending lawsuit or a future lawsuit as you begin to open your store? Jeffrey Hoffman, a prominent cannabis attorney from New York, joins us today to talk about all things regulations. Jeffrey talks about things that you should be aware of, the top 5 things that you should be aware of when you open your store in New York. This was a great conversation. Had a blast. Hope you guys enjoy.
Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's always great having an expert, not just a cannabis expert, but a legal expert on the show, because we have questions left, right, and center about what's going on in New York.
Sure. Well, that's, as you can see from the hat, that's what we do. So let's get it on.
You've helped countless companies personally, as well as through your Wednesday live 420 talk on LinkedIn. Based on what you've seen in New York, what are some of the common mistakes entrepreneurs make from a legal perspective when they're starting up their business?
Oh, so the biggest mistake, and I mean, this sounds a little self-serving as an attorney, but not working with an attorney, right? That's always true, but especially folks that have not necessarily had a lot of experience running business. I mean, if you've run and started, a dozen businesses and sold a couple or whatever, you've got a lot more experience and you know kind of the ins and outs how to do things. That is not the case for the vast majority of the folks that are getting cannabis licenses right now. A lot of the cards, while they did have a qualifying business, it was a small business for a lot of them, and they didn't necessarily have a lot of experience, how you really start up a larger scaled business like a cannabis dispensary, right? For example, which is what most of the licensees are. So having someone on your team, I do think it's best if it's a lawyer, but certainly someone on your team that has that just experience of how do you start businesses and what are the most important things. So let me give you one really important example that has had a real impact on businesses in a lawsuit that I'm in right now. So many of the businesses that are formed in cannabis generally and in New York are LLCs. In New York, part of the formation requirement of an LLC is that you do what's called a notice of publication. That means you have to run an ad in 2 newspapers in the state and then get those newspapers to send an affidavit to the Secretary of State in New York saying, yeah, this company ran their ad saying that they're a new company that exists in New York. It's not like the end of the world if you don't do that. It's not like they come and execute you or, try to board up your business. There's really one main penalty if you don't do that notice of publication. And that penalty is that you do not have standing to bring an action in the state of New York. That means you basically do not have access to the courts of the state of New York. And frankly, I would argue you can't apply for a license either or do a bunch of other things, but that's neither here nor there. You can't be in court. You couldn't sue somebody. Your entity, I guess, can respond to lawsuits, but you can't really be in court doing things. And so I'm in a case right now where the other side filed a lawsuit, and my clients were kind of collateral damage. The lawsuit was actually against the state. But because my clients would have been impacted by what happened, they did include them. They were in what we call the caption of the lawsuit. And then, I never or rarely find it in the traditional business world, but, I'm like, all right, we're going to do all of our normal stuff. We'll make sure that this is really a company and they've done all their filings and this, that, and the other thing. And lo and behold, what do I find? They never filed their notice of publication, right? Which means they did not have standing to bring that lawsuit, right? And so it's just, that's a mistake you don't want to be making for your client. In that position, you just don't want to be there. When you need to be in court, you don't want the other side to just be able to be very simply, Your Honor, it's not a properly formed corporation or not a properly formed LLC in New York. Motion to dismiss. And the judge, if he follows the law or she follows the law, has to look at it and say, yeah, dismissed, right? And so that's really, really super important. And that is about across all businesses. There are some particular things about New York, and if we want to dig into that, particularly about New York, we can certainly do that, but that is a really good example, a specific example of why you need really good, experienced people helping you with the legal process, because you don't know what you don't know, and there's a great example of something most people don't know that can really hurt you.
I love that example because oftentimes entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry, they get hung up on the regs,
Yeah.
cannabis regulation, but
Yeah.
there's normal regulations that apply too. And this is just an example of
There's
them.
just normal law. Like there's the
Yeah.
way things work in the normal world. Normal world. I love how we say it. But in the traditional business world, there's ways things work. That we don't suspend those because we're in the cannabis world, right? Yeah.
Are there anything that's cannabis specific that listeners should be aware of?
Tons. You want me to? I mean, I gave you one good example of the other one. I'll give you one good example of this one. So let's think about a lease or other contracts. Have you ever signed a lease? Have you ever had a landlord that you
Yeah.
signed a lease with? One of the things it says in the lease, and you probably didn't read the lease very carefully, but one of the things it often says in the lease is that you have to follow all laws. You can't do anything illegal in the space or while you're
Mhm.
leasing it, right? Right? No
Yeah.
illegal. You can't violate any local, state, and this is
Or
the big one, or
federal?
federal laws, right? So any standard lease you would sign typically has a clause like that. And if you don't go into it and do what we call a federal carve out for the illegality of cannabis, your landlord can now evict you anytime they want after you've signed that agreement because you're in breach. You are conducting a federally illegal business in a premise where you signed a lease saying that you would follow all federal laws.
Wow. And that's so specific to this industry. And I bet that goes through a lot of people's heads.
Well, hopefully a lot of them, when you get to the lease point, I do hope they're talking to it. I mean, you get it. A lot of people don't, or maybe some people don't. I certainly hope they're thinking about it at that point. And any cannabis attorney worth their salt would pick that out. I mean, to follow on from that, let me give you another great example. I mean, I'll give you the two for today. Let's think about this for a second. Let's say you buy a property and get a mortgage on it, or let's say you're renting a property and your landlord has a mortgage on it, right? Right?
Hmm.
What do your mortgage documents usually say? Who is the mortgage with? So for example, here in New York, Valley Bank and Dime Bank there's several other banks, but they're two of the bigger banks that will bank cannabis, right? And Hanover, got to shout out my guy Peter Sue. Hanover Bank's another one that will bank cannabis. But you get it, the big players, Chase, Citi, Bank of America, they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Well, let's say you're leasing a space from a landlord who has mortgaged the building with Chase. How excited do you think Chase is now that the landlord has rented to a federally illegal business? How about that?
That's a big one. I've heard this from Mike from Temecca that this is a big problem
How about that?
in our industry.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Have
why
you?
you need competent people. Look, here's the thing, and part of the problem is that, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too myself. People that are successful tend to think they can kind of do anything. Like I know how to do what I know how to do, so I know how to do everything. I've really kind of gotten out. I was a lot like that when I was younger. I used to run a software company. I was like, I was a lawyer, so I certainly did the legal, and I know everything about accounting, and I know everything about this. And then no. And as I've gotten older, I've really learned that lesson. It's just like these days, if it's not law, tech, or weed, I hire somebody else. I want the very best person at whatever the thing is that I need doing it. And that even goes legal. Like, I have a client that's getting ready to buy a building, and I've done tons of leases. So the leases I do a lot of. But as far as like doing closings and all the stuff like a closing and buying a property is much more involved than a lease, right? And
Mhm.
that's not to say that I don't take leases very seriously and do a lot into them. Just simply everybody gets it. A lease is a different doing a sale is at a different level than doing a lease. If I have a client buying a property, and like I said, I've done hundreds. It's possible I've done over 1,000 leases in my career. I've been an attorney 26 years now, so it's possible, but that might be high. Certainly hundreds of leases. So that I feel very comfortable with. Do those all day long. How many closings have I done for a sale? Zero. So do you really want me doing, I mean, maybe you do because you like me and you trusted me to be your cannabis attorney, but do I want me being your attorney doing your closing? No. I want the best closing attorney. So if there is a hiccup, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen this a dozen times and this is how we fix it. Whereas I'll be like, I don't know what to do about this. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
it's very important to have the right tool. This kind of thing about, people that like to hammer in screws, or people that like to do Phillips head screws with the straight screw. Get the right tool for the job, right? It's easy stuff. Go ahead.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that because a lot of professionals, lawyers, accountants, etc., they're
Yeah,
going into the cannabis industry without really understanding the
yeah,
nuances of this industry.
yeah,
If I was a business owner, I've got my license approved. Now I'm looking for, I'm building up my army of help. What should I look for a lawyer? And how do I know that the lawyer that I'm bringing on truly understands this industry?
ask around. Ask around. Who have you done this for? Who else have you done this for? What were the successes? Honestly, what were your failures? Where did you not? How did you deal with something that didn't work? Right? It's real easy to say, oh, yeah, I got all these people licenses. What did you do for the people that had problems? How did you solve their problems? Right? I mean, these are real considerations. But ask around. Um, Particularly in New York, like in every state that legalizes, cannabis becomes the it discipline, and it is still the it discipline in New York. Like when bankruptcy in an economic downturn. I mean, bankruptcy is a little tougher because it's really specialized, but like everybody's a bankruptcy attorney, right? Like whenever something is hot, that
Yeah.
becomes the thing that people get into, and uh, so everybody's divorce attorney is also now a cannabis attorney, right? And I mean, that's okay if you do the work, if you read the regs, if you read the law, if you really know what's going on. But unfortunately, as you can imagine, that's often not the case of what's going on. And I'll tell you, it's funny to me. I get obviously a lot of people calling me asking, these questions of me, which I have very good answers for, about stuff. The number one thing I hear from these putative clients when we talk about something or they have a question, and because I do my show, I'm happy to answer questions and just talk about stuff. They'll ask me something and I'll say it, and then there'll be a pause, and they'll go, huh, that's not what the other attorney told me. Yeah, yeah. And so there's going to be a heck of a lot of that. What has also happened in every market is there's been a hell of a lot of lawsuits over, well, that's not what the other attorney told me, because somebody did hire them and they did give them that advice that was wrong, leading to whatever bad result comes out of that. So yeah, that is what I would recommend on the front side is ask around. Ask around. The industry knows who the good people are. That's number
Hmm.
one. And then on the flip side, there is going to just be a lot of litigation where people got bad and wrong advice, right? For exactly these types of things, because for that 2-3 years, cannabis was the it kind of discipline, and nobody really knew who the cannabis was. Like, I remember I grew up I guess I sort of grew up in a small town, High Point, North Carolina. And in High Point, if you got a speeding ticket, everybody knew who the attorney to go to was to get you out of the speeding ticket. They would do some kind of prayer for judgment or improper equipment or God knows what else, and they'd get you off or whatever, right? So the industry will know. People will say, hey, I'm looking for a cannabis attorney. Oh, you got to go talk to this guy. You got to talk to this gal. You got to talk to this person or whatever, right? This is kind of how it works, right?
So you've been a part of a lot of different industries, traditional ones, tech,
Yeah,
tech being the new wave, at that time,
yeah.
I would imagine. Stepping into cannabis, what's different in cannabis? What have you learned that's different in this industry that other industries more or less don't have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The deals are even more insane. So like when we were doing deals in the tech world, and I both started and ran tech companies, and I also did legal work for tech companies. The rest of other industries would look at the deals we would do and would be like, you people in tech are out of your mind. Like, terms on the back of a napkin and like craziest terms you've ever seen, and people not getting, only getting equity for 80 hours a week. I mean, you name it. It was crazy. The deals in cannabis are even more insane. And because of the rules that they've made in New York, the two-tier system where if you're in supply anywhere in the world, you can't be in retail in New York and so forth. Because the deals are, I mean, like, there's deals I'm involved in right now that I'm just looking at it and I'm like, this is nuts, right? And I mean, in some cases, I've advised my clients, like, look, I get you may have to do this deal. I, as your attorney, cannot advise you. I must advise, like, literally, to protect myself in addition, I have to send them an email and say, look, I advise you not to do this deal. Because when you do it and it goes bad, if I had said do it, you're going to sue me for malpractice, right? But this is where we are in the business, right?
Yeah, and the regulations don't help either. Like,
so here's the problem with the regulations. You do have to have regulations, and people are going to sue over the regulations. You have to make your regulations strong enough that when the lawsuits come, you don't get an injunction. And that is what we failed in here in New York.
mm-hmm.
It was stone cold Steve Austin. Much like with the enforcement, we've been telling the legislature and everybody 2 years ago that the enforcement that they are finally doing now, which is starting to have an impact, we told them 2 years ago that's what they needed to be doing. And if they'd have started doing it 2 years ago, we wouldn't have the mess of the illicit stores that we do now. But they didn't. So we are where we are. You have to make your regs as injunction proof as possible. And unfortunately, when they came out with the regs about the card program, the first retail license, and they did it such that the conviction had to be a New York State conviction, whether or not you win or lose the lawsuit ultimately, you've got a very good dormant commerce clause argument there. And in fact, the First Circuit, not even the district court, the first court, but the appeals court that covers Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire and those areas up there, they've already ruled that no, you can't have residency requirements for cannabis licensing. It violates this dormant commerce clause. And it's arguable that who's going to have the New York State cannabis convictions? New York State residents, right? So there's a lawyer in California whose entire career is based on looking at every state as they legalize and create new regulations, figuring out what they did wrong, and then suing them over that. Mm. And so this lawyer scoured the nation and found an individual in Michigan who met every requirement of the card license, except his conviction was a Michigan state conviction, not a New York state conviction. They sued over that and got an injunction, and it cost us like 4 or 5 months. There was an injunction in place for 4 or 5 months. The state finally settled and gave Michigan guy a license. That was the settlement, and a license to do whatever the hell he wanted to do, wherever you want, the whole thing, right? Then we had the next one when the disabled veterans and a couple of the ROs sued, right? And their big thing was there's a part of the law, forget even the regs. In the law, in the powers of the Cannabis Control Board, I believe it's number 9, it says basically you can do whatever you want when it comes to the applications and when they open and who you're doing it for. However, the first retail dispensary application period shall be open to everyone at the same time. That's in the law. You tell me, sir, is that what we did? No.
Definitely not.
Okay. So what happens when somebody sues about that? Injunction.
Yeah.
And we lost another 4 or 5. It was from August to like December, I think. November maybe, whatever it was. There's almost a year. That's almost a year. Forget Cuomo costing you 6 months right at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's another year. That's an own goal. Nobody else did that to you. You did that to yourself.
What's preventing more lawsuits?
Nothing. There's plenty. I shouldn't say this, but I mean, I got plenty of stuff I could sue over that will shut down everything in the state immediately.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not doing it because I want this to work. And I love the folks at OCM. They're great people, right? But it could get to the point where it's just enough is enough, okay? and I don't want to do it. And there's other, I'm not the only attorney that knows this. I mean, there's the cannabis, like in lawyerdom and attorneydom, there are things called the X bar. So there's a bankruptcy bar. There's a divorce bar. There's a trust and estates bar, right? There's a cannabis bar. And it's all the attorneys that are not Johnny-come-latelys, that, were divorce attorneys last week and are cannabis attorneys this week. It's the folks that have been doing it for a while and really know what they're talking about. And they know just as well as I do the things that we could absolutely go get an injunction about tomorrow, right? But we all want the industry to work, right? And we're tired of all these delays. And so it's like, please, to your point, can we just do regs that don't violate the Constitution, don't violate the cannabis law, right? I mean, please. And then when you do stuff, don't violate your own regs when you do it, right?
That's a big one. So where are we today? What would it take for no more future lawsuits?
No, that's not possible.
That road
there's two. Look. We decided very early on in this country, sue me, sue you, sue everybody, right? Jerky Boys, right? You know the Jerky Boys. Maybe you don't. Google it if you don't know. Jerky Boys. And look up punitive damages. That's all you need to know. This was a great radio comedy team, and they just got a great episode about this. Our whole system in this country is built on litigation, right? And litigation does not necessarily mean being in court, in front of a judge arguing things. And litigation includes everything up to that. Most, I would say maybe 80% of matters that I would consider quote unquote litigated never get to the point where a judge renders a verdict or a jury renders a verdict. They get settled when a party files the first, notice and summons. Like, that is usually when your counterparty goes, oh, I guess they're serious about this, right? So very often right after that, they get settled, right after, the first batch of paperwork in court, and one side decides, wow, this is really expensive. I don't think I want to do this anymore, right? A lot of stuff gets settled then, but I consider all of that litigation. That is what our entire system is based upon. And there's my line, and you've probably heard me say this, nothing but lawsuits all the way down. And so far, we've only seen the lawsuits against the state. We are now and I've just really seen a big pickup in this in the last 2, 3, 4 months. We're now really starting to see the lawsuits pick up between the businesses, right? And so nothing can prevent that. That's the gears that our system grinds on.
You can't prevent it, but is there anything that the regulators or the people involved can do to have better footing when
listen to your lawyers. Clearly their lawyers told them the same thing we told them. Like, I told them, other members of the bar, like, are you really going to go with these regs? Really? This is what you're going to do? And I'm sure their internal counsel told them the same thing, and they ignored them, right? They full steam ahead, and we saw what the result was. So don't do that, right? And I do think now, there's going to be a complete regime change now, right? The governor fired the executive director. All of the board members' terms are up in the next month or two. Some maybe get reappointed, some maybe not. I would be very interested to see how that plays out. But, I do think, I am optimistic. Ms. Reed, the interim executive director, she's done some good things there. But yeah, just listen to your attorneys. They're trying to keep you out of trouble.
If I was a license holder that I haven't opened yet, how can I mitigate the risk that there may be an injunction before the doors open?
Get open. No, you can't get open. This is, if you're a client of mine and if any of my clients watch this, they'll probably start twitching when they hear me say that, because literally there've been clients where they would ask me like, hey, Jeffrey, what time are you coming to the game? Have you opened the store yet? That would be my response, right? It's that has proven to be the inflection point. If you're open when an injunction happens, you remain open. And if you're not open, you sit until the injunction is done away with, right? Or until the judge gives an exception to the injunction, which did happen in the veterans case. So really, the answer is head down, straight ahead, get open. because that is your only safe harbor.
If I were opening up a store, let's say I'm open now, top of your head, what are the 5 things about U.S. regulations that I may not know or I should be aware of? That are
U.S. or New York?
New York.
Because
Sorry, New
no,
York.
yeah, okay. I mean, that you don't know. I mean, I don't
that
know
I
what
should be
people
aware
don't
of,
know.
or that
All
I
right.
should be aware of.
And so you're saying you already have a license. You're an applicant. Where are you? Because it's different
I have
depending
a
on where you are.
license.
Yeah.
I'm gonna operate soon.
Or you need investors or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the 2-tier system, right? You need to be very careful who you're working with as far as an investor or people that are going to do business with you as far as the plant touching part of the business because of the 2-tier system, right? Nobody on the supply side can be on the retail side. Nobody on the retail side can be on the supply side. You know, you need to be very careful and know who you're working with and vet them for everything along those lines and how it works. Depending on what kind of licensee you are, most folks are going to be some type of retail licensee. The distance rules, right? So everybody knows the 500 feet from a school, 200 from the church. There's also the public youth facility. Interestingly enough, the public youth facility rules don't apply to the card licenses. We were actually at a community board meeting not too long ago where the community board said, we're voting you down because you're too close to a public youth facility. And my client is sitting next to me going, why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you saying anything? And I'm like, just be quiet. Yes, thank you. Please deny us for the public youth facility. And then because at the beginning of the meeting, they had read for me and him the reg where it talks about the public youth facility, and they got to a period. If they had read the one sentence beyond the period, it would have been, however, this restriction shall not apply to those licensed under Part 116. What is Part 116? Card. What kind of license did my client at that meeting have? Card. What does that mean? That means the reason that they were going to write OCM to deny, or not, they can't deny, just to say we don't want you to give them this license, is completely invalid. Completely invalid. They look like idiots in what they sent to OCM, right? There's nothing I like more as an attorney to like be at a hearing or an event or somebody else is going to do something where they just want to shout something 100% wrong at the top of their lungs. Like, we both have 10 minutes in front of the judge. You use your 10 minutes. You can have 7 of my 10 minutes. You just keep going, right? Nothing I like better than that. And then the judge is like, do you even go to law school? I mean, that's the best, right? So yeah, 2-tier system, the distance rules. You said 5 that you might not know. I mean, there's so many other types of, like, how the rules work as far as how you have to do the sales, right? So there's an age requirement. You can have people under 21 that are like doing back office stuff, but if you're over 21, you can't interact with the public. You can't touch the cannabis. Rules about how you have to do the IDs when people come into the facilities. Rules about the zoning, right? So like different parts of the state are going to have different zoning rules. And frankly, some of them are allowed by the regulations that OCM has made, and some of them are not, particularly out on Long Island. There's some regulations. There's some zoning rules out on Long Island that are probably not allowed under the cannabis regulations. So, I mean, it's all this stuff, right? And I mean, it's just why you got to have people that know this so that they can help guide you through it.
I want to ask you something very specific because we're a people platform. What are the rules that people don't necessarily know about your employees and who you can hire?
Well, so obviously no one under 18. 18 to 21, I kind of gave you the restrictions. They can't be interacting with the public, can't be touching the cannabis, all of these types of things. The rest are probably just going to be more normal HR rules, about things you can and can't do, things you can and can't ask on an interview. New York and New York City in particular have even more specific rules than just the general federal rules as far as, needing to list salary ranges and all these types of things and whatnot. The main one about cannabis, I think, is really the age rules. I don't know that I would say that there's a whole lot about cannabis that Otherwise, it's hiring that is really different from other just kind of HR rules.
Yeah. Are there rules regarding if they have to be your employee? Can you hire subcontractors to work for you?
So here's the very interesting part about it. This is very complicated. This is not legal advice. Talk to your own attorney, but I'm going to tell you where we are with this. So there is a place in the regulations where they did say you can't outsource the fundamental things that the business does. So you can outsource your accounting, you can outsource your legal, right? But you couldn't outsource, if you're a cultivator, you couldn't outsource like going and watering the plants and trimming the plant, right? You had to do, those had to be your employees. You could have experts come in and say, well, this is how you ought to do it, and you ought to do this, and this is how you ought to do your greenhouse. But you had to have your employees actually do it.
So let's say if you're a dispensary, your sales associate, for example.
Yeah, those have to be employees. Or the more important one, really, I think, for those guys is the delivery. The delivery has to be your employees, right? What's very interesting is, you remember the Leafly lawsuit?
No.
Leafly is the lawsuit about the third-party platforms where basically you couldn't use Leafly or Weed Maps if you're a New York dispensary and appear next to other dispensaries, right? The way Leafly and Weed Maps work is we're going to show you all of the dispensaries. You want this product, you go to this one, and off you go. The way the New York regs worked, you couldn't do that. The New York dispensaries couldn't be on the generic Weed Maps thing. Weed Maps could just provide them a website for that dispensary. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So Leafly sued, and I think spent most of the money on the lawsuit. Weed Maps kind of went along with them because they're the two biggest players impacted by it. And this was the lawsuit. Do you remember there was this weird thing where the judge basically threw out all of New York's regulations, and like everybody's heads exploded, and then the next day he came back and said, oh, no, I only mean these very specific ones. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is what we're talking about. And it turns out that one of the specific regulations that he put an injunction on was this one that said you have to hire, it can only be your employees doing the thing. I think it does still apply for delivery because that's in a different section in the regs. But this other general prohibition of being able to outsource the actual cultivating, the actual processing, or what have you, is on hold right now pending the final resolution of the Leafly lawsuit. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Exciting times.
So that's an open issue, right? So like, it's interesting. Back when the intoxicating hemp loophole was still doable here in New York, I had a client that came to me and was like, oh yeah, we're going to go spend $3 million and we're going to set up this facility and we're going to go crazy. And I'm like, New York is going to come for this. And then the other states are going to come for it one after the other. I don't advise you to do this. And sure enough, what happened like 3 months later? New York came for it. I think you just saw California has now come for it, right? And so I'm just saying you got to be really careful where you've got these kind of loopholey or things that are only happening because of an injunction or God knows what else is going on. Like betting your business on those things, I don't think is a great idea, right? So I'd be very careful before I went and outsourced my whole operation because it's entirely possible this thing winds its way through the system and then eventually this regulation comes back into force, right? So you got to be careful.
Yeah, no, it's true because this regulation specifically is for your employees and there's a reason why they have it in there, and cooler heads will prevail eventually.
I don't know about that. Some judge is going to prevail.
So what's happening in the New York market today? How has the market shifted? So
there's 170 plus dispensaries. We're finally getting the number up there, finally. Again, it's going to be 4 years in March. Yikes. We'll have a lot more by then, but I mean, we should probably be over 1,000 by now, honestly. They are working their way through the November, December licensing queues. Well, they're not really working their way through the December one. They are working their way through the November one. We got a lot of cultivation. So you remember we had all these AUCC and AUCP, the hemp people that were the first ones that got to cultivate and process. They are all doing their conversions. They're allowed to either convert to a big cultivation. I think they can also get a micro license instead if they want, but they're all now doing their converting. And so many, if not most of those licenses have been given out. Some of the other cultivation, processing, and distribution licenses have been given out. A ton of retail licenses have been given out. The enforcement is finally having some effect. They finally got serious about it after us telling them for 2 years what to do. It is having an impact. They still need to do more, and they didn't need to do more of it, but at least it's going in the right direction and not continuing to go in the wrong direction. Yeah, that's kind of where we are right now.
Do you have you seen a significant, or will there be more and more stores open up and we can tackle legal cannabis the right way?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. There's more stores opening all the time now.
That's awesome.
The one thing, I mean, I had this past week, and I count the weeks from Wednesday to Wednesday. I just from one show to the next, and this was the first time between shows where I had 2 client stores open. Previously, I'd only what's up with the balloons? But previously, I'd only ever had one.
It's a celebration.
Yeah, a celebration, I guess. I think I've probably got 2 dozen. Is it 2 dozen? It can't be that many because that's like over 10% of the market. I mean, maybe it's true. Maybe my clients are 10% of the market. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, so I've opened up that many stores. But I mean, I've got just in my clients, I've probably got, and not all of them will necessarily get licenses, but I've probably got 250 pending licensees, right? Mm-hmm. So lots of stores opening. The one caveat I will give to that, and everybody's just got to, none of this is going to happen as quickly as anybody wants it to. And I think the governor thought that by doing what she did with OCM back in May was going to make things immediately go faster. In the short term, it's only going to be slower, okay? It will get faster. And I don't know if you saw in this last board meeting where they talked about how they're going to go to like one account, like if you're a licensee, there's going to be one person that you talk to, one account manager responsible for that. You know, there was this loudmouth attorney that literally has been saying that in his public comments at every board meeting for like a year, right? And so finally they're doing it, right? I'm like, there's no way you can properly run an account management process without having account managers, and that's the single point of contact for whoever the accounts are, right? It's just, that's why every business does that, because that is the best practice. You're going to go reinvent some other way of doing this, you're going to fail, and that's what happened here. Yeah.
So that's great. That's great to see.
It's just that I think this getting faster, it's just going to take a little while. So I think in the medium term, things will go faster, but in the short term, honestly, they're going to go slower. Yeah.
Before I let you go, where has the illicit market gone? Well, what's the enforcement on that today?
So it is being enforced against, but in a lot of places, it's having a big impact. I have clients and have talked to many other folks where like the illicit stores near them were closed down and their revenue doubled, right? So it's absolutely having an impact. Now, the cat and mouse game is on, okay? So I'll give you an example. There's a very well-known illicit store franchise or multi-store operator, let's call them that had a location, maybe still does, on Broadway just north of Canal Street. They got closed. The sheriff came and put the padlock, the big sheriff's padlock on it. The business went the next day, cut the padlock, and reopened, right? And so, and I don't know if you've ever seen the sheriff in New York. He's a very impressive individual. He's like 6'4", got the porn star mustache going on. He is a bad motherfucker, right? I would not be cutting this guy's padlock if I were you. That's what they did. I do think they're going to shut them down again because it's pretty obvious what they're doing. But that kind of cat and mouse game is now on, right? So like places breaking back into their own stores and reopening. Another tactic that they're doing is a lot of the stores are waiting to open until in the evening because most of the enforcement activities are during the day, right? So they're closed during the day, then they reopen at night when they believe there's less risk of an enforcement action.
What's the current penalty right now on this?
So it's kind of all over the map. It can be tons and tons of money. It depends on how much cannabis you had. And there's all kinds of, there's a thing that says like if you did this, it can be this, and if it's maybe we come back a second or third time, it escalates. It's not as bad as what I want it to be, and it's not going after exactly who I want it to be, although they did finally start going after who they ought to go after, and that is the landlords.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what planet we live on where the landlord has no responsibility for who he is leasing his property to, and no responsibility to just go and check every now and then, are they actually doing what they told me they were going to do when they leased the property, right? Somehow we've just abdicated that responsibility for the landlord in New York, and especially here in New York City, in its entirety. If you really wanted to solve the problem, the fines would be on the landlord. It would be, we're giving every landlord in the state of New York notice that we're going to come and do inspections. First time, it's a $10,000 fine. Second time, it's a $100,000 fine. And the third time, we take your building. Okay? You would have to take exactly one building.
Yeah.
After you take one building, every other landlord in the state of New York will take care of your problem for you.
Yeah.
And when we really want to get serious about this problem, that is what we'll do. However, let me tell you why that is not going to happen. What is one of the top 3 donors to our elected officials up in Albany? It is REBNY, R-E-B-N-Y, which stands for Real Estate Board of New York. And I have no problem with them as an organization. I have no problem with them and their membership. But do you think they're going to let some legislation get through where their landlords' buildings can get seized? They're going to fight that till the cows come home. So we will see how serious we are about this, right?
Thank you so much for joining us today. Wealth of knowledge. How can our listeners find you?
So the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Jeffrey Hoffman, Jeffreyhoffman. I have my show every Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. It's called Ask Me Anything about cannabis legalization in New York. And for those of you that like a website, you can go to 420jurist.com. That is 420 jurist.com. That's my website. You can also get links over to my LinkedIn stuff at the top of the page. And that's how you get me. Come to my LinkedIn show. Come ask questions, just like we did today. This is what we do.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeffrey.
Thank you for having me, sir.
I hope you guys liked that conversation. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, wherever you're listening. It helped us out a lot. Until next time, guys, take care.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access the full archive of episodes from the show.